There is no box.
All right. So, Steve, why don't you open us up there?
Lord God, thank you again for the opportunity for us to gather around the Word. Lord, pray that the message of heard has been delivered, that we have ears to hear, Lord, that understand, the time that we're in and just what a spiritually active time it is, Lord, that we defend ourselves with the Word that you left for us, Lord, that we have it in our hearts, and go out and defend, the truth that you left for us and the death of your Son, Jesus Christ. It's paid for us all. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, so let's just lower our camera here a little bit. So we are going to be talking about the satanic roots of Halloween. Now, I know Mama Kelly is out there, and she was asking a little earlier, like, what verses are we referring to? And the fact of the matter is there is a plethora of that's a good idea. Plethora of verses that are applicable to this particular topic. So what we're going to do is start out with sort of a historical overview of how Halloween actually started, and then we'll talk about some of the verses in the Bible that relate to the issue at hand. The issue at hand is, is Halloween a holiday that we should be celebrating as Christians, even as non-Christians? Are there some consequences to it? And more importantly, should Christians be involved in this type of celebration and revelry? And so I think there's some ample support in the Bible that would suggest what the answer is. That's not to say that anybody who went trick-or-treating as a kid, which I did, was Midwestern tradition, because I thought that was a Midwestern tradition, right? Pumpkin patches. We had pumpkin patches in our town. You actually drove out to the pumpkin patch and picked out the one you wanted, and then you bring it home and you carved it and whatever. That was, a Charlie Brown Halloween. That's what I grew up with. But it was because I didn't know any better. But having looked at the occult over the course of the last few years, just as part and parcel of doing Bible studies, it's become obvious that what we celebrate today, sort of a lovable American sort of tradition and holiday, really dates all the way back to ancient Babylon as a way that Satan was able to co-opt the worship that was due to God, and setting up along the way a number of rituals that resulted ultimately in the sacrifice of human beings. And so blood sacrifices started back in the day with, that emperor of emperors, none other than Nimrod, back, 2,500 years, before Christ. It was Nimrod in Babylon, in ancient Babylonia, about the time of the Tower of Babel. And so I brought my little overview time chart there that kind of lays out what we're going to be talking about and how this entire tradition came to be. But it really became this celebration of October 31st as this special day of acknowledgement. Really started out and became popularized when the Celtic people, spell it like the Boston Celtics, they were a people who were originally Indo-European that sort of migrated into what today is England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Back then was called Britannia, and they kind of were the keepers of the flame, if you will, from what we've talked about was ancient Babylonian paganism. Nimrod started the ball rolling way back, and before him, really, if you really want to look at some of the verses that we're going to look at in a little bit, the ball started rolling with the fall in the Garden of Eden. And why do I say that? Why do I say that, Ingrid? What might be one of the reasons why I say that, the roots of Halloween and all the trappings, witches and goblins
because
and demons.
of Eve, she was the first witch, or
The
essentially
term Wiccan is like wise one, means the knowledge seeker. And she became the first Wiccan because what? She
pursued occultic knowledge.
She pursued occultic knowledge. Satan's deal with her wasn't a trunk load of gold doubloons or something like that. Hey, rebel against God, and I'll give you a trunk load of gold. No, his gambit was, if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which God has forbidden you to do, you'll become a goddess. You'll have the same knowledge, and you can be just like God. And you should be, because there are no female gods in the universe, and you can be the first one. And she saw that, wow, this was a tree desirable to make one wise, not, rich, but wise. She decided to eat it. And what did she do after she ate it?
Gave it to her husband.
That was the first thing she did after becoming the first Wiccan, was to get her husband to go along with the satanic gambit that he never would have on his own done. So really, the satanic roots of Halloween start out with point one, which would be Eve falling in the garden around 4000 BC, way back at the beginning of time, where man lost his innocence in the garden. That's where the first knowledge seeker, occultic means hidden. Occult knowledge is hidden knowledge. God wanted to hide the knowledge of good and evil from Adam and Eve because they were innocent and childlike. But Satan made this hidden knowledge, this knowledge of evil, he made it appealing. He made it seem fun. He made it seem exciting. And isn't that what we have with Halloween? Each year it rolls around. We've got it coming up in 2 days. So we're here on October 29th, in 2 days. It'll be Halloween. And on Miami Beach, that's a big deal. In New York City, that's a big deal. All across the country, it's a big deal. Because it's exciting. It's something hidden. It's something that we normally don't interact with, the spirits of the dead, And that's really what the Celtic Druids made popular to the masses. And, these individuals, like I said, they ultimately migrated into the area that was then called Britannia, that ultimately became England, Scotland, Wales, France, Germany. These areas were evangelized, if you will, by individuals who had adopted, from point 2 on our outline, the old Nimrod worship system, which was established in about 2400 BC. And so if we look on our timeline here, we've got the fall here in the Garden of Eden, and then we have a little bit later, we've got the Tower of Babel being built after the flood of Noah. Shortly after the flood of Noah, Nimrod came along and became the first world emperor. And he established this system where he got to be the god. And we've already studied in times past, when we looked into the Nephilim and the like, that Scripture says in Genesis chapter 10 and 1 Chronicles that Nimrod, through some kind of ritual, occultic ritual that involves sexual and genetic defilement, he was able to make himself into a Gibberim, or a mighty one, or a Nephilim. And he began to become this God-man. And after that, he was actually worshipped as a God-like figure. And historically, his name was changed to Marduk, and people worshipped him as the god Marduk. And then eventually he's killed by Shem, who's the son of Noah, because of what? Well, tradition says it was because he introduced a form of ritualized worship wherein he could be worshipped and the gods that gave him his powers would be worshipped. And that included homosexual rights, pedophilia, having sex with children was kind of one of Nimrod's masterminds. And ultimately, the same way that God would require animal blood sacrifices in the temple, Satan was requiring blood sacrifices of animals, but also of human beings. And so we find that Nimrod is the person that the origination of human blood sacrifices is attributed to, which is why God had him taken out. And after he was taken out, his wife Semiramis continued the mythos of Nimrod being a god-man by doing what, Steve?
By through her son, Tammuz.
And
basically saying that she had been, impregnated by a beam of light from the sun, which was Nimrod, and she gave birth then to Tammuz, who she'd been proclaimed to be Nimrod also.
So there you have it. That was really the genesis of the whole Mystery Babylon worship system that we will be looking at next week. When we get to Revelation chapter 17, we'll be up to Mystery Babylon. And, when I first read in the book of Revelation about Mystery Babylon, I was like, well, what in the world is that? What is Mystery Babylon? What does it mean? What it is, it's really this ancient Babylonian pagan system of worship where men can be gods by obtaining for themselves occultic knowledge, and to empower the gods that give you the ability to become a god, you do blood sacrifices of animals and humans, as well as perverted sexual rituals. So, after Nimrod's death, Semiramis, his wife, furthered the legend, if you will, of Nimrod, and claimed that this individual had been reincarnated in the form of her son, Tammuz, who the Egyptians later renamed Horus. What really happened is she was fooling around with the pool boy and got pregnant, but she couldn't have the people in Babylon know that she wasn't the chaste virgin queen that she was supposed to be. So we had this imitation or verisimilitude of the virgin birth of a God-man reincarnated as the God-man son. And supposedly Nimrod went up into the sun, and when you looked up at the sun, there he was. That was the reincarnated Nimrod in the form of the sun god. So now he had ascended to godhood. It's what the Greek term there would be what, Steve? Who can get the extra bonus point for when a man turns into a god?
Apotheosis.
Steve, man. Steve wins the door prize for the night. Apotheosis. And we see that even one of our own political leaders here in the United States was depicted that way. Who might that be? Who can guess who that was?
First President, George Washington.
George Washington. If you go to Washington, D.C. and go in the Capitol Rotunda, that big dome, which is really the symbol of the impregnated belly of Semiramis, who's giving birth to Tammuz, Horus, New Age, the New World Order, and the Antichrist. If you look on the painting done in the ceiling of the Capitol Rotunda, you'll see actually a depiction of President George Washington, who is ascended into the heavens, but not the heavens of the Bible, but the heavens of the pagan gods of antiquity, where he's become Zeus, So we see that George Washington has undergone apotheosis from just a mere president of the United States of America to a Zeus-like god figure depicted in the Capitol Rotunda. So Nimrod is the guy that got all that started way back once upon a time. So that's where we get point 2 on our 13. How am I? 13, symbol of number of witchcraft and dark arts. We've got 13 basic bullet points here. So Nimrod starts this Mystery Babylon system with the horned sun death god and goddess system being worshipped. So Semiramis gets to be the goddess, and she eventually becomes the queen of heaven, the goddess that lives in the sky along with her husband. And as a result of that, there's a fall harvest, because this tradition, which we now call Halloween, originally started out way back in ancient Babylon. There were growing cycles. So for agrarian societies, you could grow things, and you would basically plant them not in the wintertime. When would you plant your crops? In the springtime. And then you'd let them grow, and then you'd harvest them when?
Fall.
That's right.
Right,
You'd let them grow all summer long. And then when the fall came, before the winter came and killed off all your crops, you'd harvest them up. So the winter was coming at the end of fall. And so it sort of got tied into this whole let's worship the sun system that Nimrod started, where the sun became the god of the pagan peoples, because the sun was necessary for the crops to grow. If the sun god didn't make my crops grow, then my farm would get starved out. So you would do certain rituals and ceremonies and practices to ensure that the sun god, who is Nimrod, who is Marduk, who is really Satan in disguise as these would-be sky gods, he won't make your crops grow. So you have this whole series of ceremonies that started and were tied to the land and tied to the growing seasons and tied to the fall harvest, that ultimately individuals that came along after Babylonian paganism became really well established. Well, about 2300 BC, you had the first of the Celtic people, mysterious group of people that eventually took root and sort of became seated in what's modern day Ireland. And that's where we get, sort of the Celtic tradition and the Celtic language. And, that's different than English, and it's different from French and all of that. These individuals really date themselves back to about 2300 to 2000 BC. So 2,000 years before Jesus was born, you have the Celtic people, who were the forebearers of the Aryans or the Indo-European people, the Scotch Gaelic people of Scotland and Ireland, all trace their roots back to these Celtic people who had a fall harvest festival that ultimately became recognized on one specific day. It will be on our calendar October 31st. And it was in the Celtic tongue referred to as Samhain, and it was spelled Samhain is the Anglican sort of spelling of the word Samhain. It looks like it says Samhain, but it's really pronounced Samhain in the Celtic tongue. And so it was on that day that the people began doing certain ceremonies, and we'll look a little bit at that. The individuals who came along, who promoted this ancient Babylonian mystery system, and it became a mystery system because once it became clear that human blood sacrifice, which really originated with Nimrod back in ancient Babylon, once it became clear that was going to be part of this religious practice to help the land grow, well, there's certain groups of people that in fact, the God of Israel comes along and creates the nation of Israel, and he raises up judges and kings that are opposed to this type of thing. And so now you have God opposing this really cult of death. And so as a result of God raising up mighty and powerful kings and prophets and judges who oppose this type of practice, particularly as they were battling for the land of Canaan, this type of religious practice of ancient Babylon had to go underground or in hiding. And that's how it became the mystery religion. So you would change the names, and you would change some of the characters, and you would have symbols that really represented this, but you knew that the hidden meaning behind it was that. And that's why it became what we refer to in the book of Revelation as the mystery Babylon. It's a mystery religion. It's the same today with what, Steve? What type of professional guilds or orders? I mean, they had ancient guilds back in the day that if you didn't belong to the guild, you couldn't get a job building a house or building a cathedral or doing whatever. There you go. The Freemasons of today. There's all types of ceremony. If you found the ceremonial book, you'd see, okay, they got a checkerboard square, and you wear this apron, and then you got this thing, and you do this hand thing. But you don't know what it means because there's meaning behind the meaning. You may be, it's the right hand of fellowship. That means, you're a fellow. But it really has a double-fold meaning. And that's because those are the individuals who have been initiated into the special occultic. And again, occultic doesn't just mean devils and demons. It means hidden knowledge. So they have been initiated in Freemasonry and the different organizations that are similar to that. They've been initiated into the hidden meaning or the hidden knowledge behind the outward symbolism. That, again, it's amazing how all of this ties right into ancient Babylonian paganism of Nimrod and Semiramis of 2,500 years before Christ. So Mystery Babylon goes underground because blood sacrifices are involved. Now, a group of people come along who are carrying the torch of Nimrod's mystery religion system. And these individuals would teach the new cultures how to worship the trees, how to worship the rocks, how to acknowledge the sun as a god, and that, his consort, the queen, lives in the sky as well and is the queen of heaven. we find that even ancient Israel was criticized and judged and punished by God for what? For worshiping the Queen of Heaven, baking cakes to the Queen of Heaven, and worshiping the sun god in the temple of Solomon by turning their backs to the Holy of Holies and facing the east so that they could worship Nimrod, the sun god, when the sun would rise in the east. And we find that in the Old Testament. Ingrid? Oh, no. Okay, so what we find then is that there's this group of people, this special class of people that would initiate, the same way as we as evangelical Christians, we go out and we evangelize the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, Nimrod's, predecessors or the individuals that followed after him also evangelized the sun god worship system that really was Satan's idea, superimposed in Nimrod, and then after he dies, carried on through his wife Semiramis. And the individuals that promoted this were who? They were really the priests of Babylon, taking the Babylonian mystery religion into new societies. Who are these people, Steve?
Like the, like Akkad and Erech and all these other...
Those are the cities that they went to, but there arose a special class of priests who were especially anointed to carry forth the flame. What were these individuals? In the Celtic society, these individuals were called the Druids. And the Druids, literally, in the Celtic tongue, it kind of meant oak man, or men of oak. Why would they call themselves Druids, or men of oak?
Oh, because they worship trees, too. They worship trees as God.
Right. The oak tree was this special entity because they believed that God lived inside of the oak tree. And so, they worship not only rocks, but they worship the trees. And that's where we get the term Druid from. The Druids were the oak men, the ones, the priests who worshiped the gods living in the oak trees. And so, one of the ceremonies, and Steve, you've talked about this in the past, one of the fall harvest ceremony traditions that the Druids created was known as what?
The Burning Man?
Burning Man, or
Wicker
I
Man.
call the Wicker Man.
Yeah.
It's also
But
called
today's
Burning
version,
Man.
yeah.
Burning Man is now a sort of rock and roll antecedent of what started out as the Druid Wicker Man ceremonies. Tell us about that, Steve.
Basically, yeah, I guess, you got it's basically the same idea of making a blood sacrifice to whatever sky god for the harvest. And it would include, animals, man, children, whatever it took to put inside of this huge wicker man, this man made of wicker, and set it on fire.
Yeah, so in essence, what they would do, they'd make a giant effigy of a man made of wicker. If you ever go to IKEA, you see look, a wicker or rattan chair or something like that. Burns very easily, dry and brittle, and they would place animals, grain sacrifices, and ultimately human beings inside this giant statue of a man made of wicker, and then they would set it on fire on October 31st and burn that as a sacrifice to the sky god, who was the god of the dead and also the god of the sun, and he's the god that made the crops grow. And so this tradition carried itself forward from as far back as 2,000 years before Christ. And eventually, shortly after Christ, around 47 AD, the Roman Empire, which now had sort of taken sway over most of the world, had replaced Babylon as the world empire, was, I believe it was Julius Caesar, who thought, this is such a brutal and outrageous. Even the Romans were horrified and turned off when they would invade these countries controlled by the Celtic Druids, and they found that there was a tradition where they would burn people to death to appease the god of the sun to make the crops grow. This is madness. This isn't, and the Romans were, if nothing else, they were about order and civilization. They give you toilets. They gave us viaducts and roads. Sure. We can't have you going around sacrificing kids to the sky god. So it was outlawed by the Roman Empire. And during the Gallic Wars in around 47 AD, Julius Caesar was a Roman general at the time before he became the ruler. he was horrified by what he saw when he would go out into the field of battle as they were taking over these countries that were controlled by Celtic Druidism, and saw the child sacrifices. And when the Celts were defeated at what was then called Britannia, which is now Great Britain, the Druids were driven underground, and they didn't disappear. They were still in Great Britain, Britannia, but they went into hiding. And so you had Druidism really joining in and becoming part of the Mystery Babylon system because they had to keep it a secret as it was outlawed. Now, by 500 AD, this whole Mystery Babylon Druidism system kind of was syncretized into the Roman Empire via this new entity that had come along, which was the Roman Catholic Church. So, point 5, well, let's take a look. Point 3, we have the Wicker Man ceremony, and under point 3, we have traditions that grew up around that. And what were some of the traditions? Well, the tradition of celebrating the sort of Druidic or Celtic New Year's Eve would be October 31st, since November 1st was considered the first day of the harvest, and it was their sort of New Year's Day. The night before would be the New Year's Eve, if you would. So the Celtic Druids would have their big celebration on October 31st, and ultimately, over the course of time, these Druids who were in hiding in Britannia and Gaul and these areas that eventually became under the control of the Roman Empire when they went to Britannia and conquered it and ruled it, eventually, as the Roman Empire gave way to this new entity called the Roman Catholic Church, we know that one of the greatest satanic intrigues was what? Who was the emperor that overnight supposedly saw a vision and decided that Christianity was no longer going to be Constantine. That's right. Constantine is the guy who actually, by legal fiat, sort of overnight signed some papers and said Christianity is no longer outlawed in the land. It's the official religion of the state. And in doing so, you destroyed the Church of Rome. And part and parcel of, and this ties in, goodness forbid, it ties into our sort of corporate commercial church system that we see prevalent to this very day, and which was warned about by Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that in the last days apostasy would come into the church, or falling away from real Christianity. It really started when Constantine in about 325 AD officially declared Christianity to be part of the Roman state system and became the Roman state church that would be universal throughout the land, which is why it was called Catholic. And it eventually became the Roman Catholic or universal state church system that was controlled throughout the kingdom. And it was from that point onward that there was an impetus or a motive or a benefit in doing what, Steve? You got the pagans running around in the woods sacrificing animals and children and getting drunk and having, their Saturnalia, which was this alcohol and sex festival on December 25th. Yep. And then you had on October 31st, which was what was called Samhain, which is the Celtic way of celebrating this day of interacting with the gods, because, the sun god, who was the sky god, who was Nimrod, was also, he had a duality of nature. He was also the god of death, right? He could make you come back from the dead after you had been alive. And so what you would do is worship this god, who was called, in some instances, Samhain, which is, again, the Samhain spelling. He's the god of summer's end. He is the god of the harvest. So he would be worshipped, and there would be a special day to celebrate him, and that would be November 1st, but the night before, which would be the eve of the harvest festival day, is when you would do the Wicker Man. It's when you would do the special nighttime ceremony, because they believe that on October 31st, after midnight, the veil between the living world and the non-living world is the thinnest ever, and that's the time you could interact with the spirits. And so that became a very special time of year. Once Druidism was eventually syncretized into the Roman Empire, they went into hiding and became a mystery Babylon system. It eventually, when Constantine connected the Roman Empire with the Roman Christianity, and it became the Roman Catholic Church, guess what? The Druid priests who were in hiding in their mystery Babylon system snuck in or crept in, as Paul says, unawares, into the Roman Church system. Now, again, you've got these ceremonies. October 31st is sort of your New Year's Eve, where the Druids would do what? They would dress up initially as goblins and ghosts and demons. Why would they do that, Steve?
In order to scare away the spirits that would come to haunt them.
It was believed that on October 31st, that people that had died that year would haunt the town, haunt the land, and they would get taken down into the underworld, and they would sometimes come out of the underworld, so the spirits of the dead would come back and haunt the town where they died. And so it became a tradition in these Celtic Druid communities that you would appease the spirits of the dead by doing what Ingrid's doing. Preparing a meal in the kitchen, like, October 31st, honey, we better put some Domino's pizza outside our door and maybe a liter of soda, because when the spirits of Joe Blow, who died in 14B down the hall, when he comes walking by on October 31st, he's going to want a snack. He's going to want a special, October 31st, Feast of the Dead, because he's now a servant of the God of the dead, and if there isn't some kind of special, treat or present or offering made to him, he's going to do something like, maybe, go downstairs and scratch up a Kia car, or maybe, paint an X on the door or something like that. So it became a tradition that you would prepare a treat for these spirit beings on October 31st, and you would leave it outside your door. So that's where we got what today is considered trick-or-treating, where you would give treats to the spirits of the dead. So you'd have these dead spirits going through town, and you'd also have these demonic entities coming out of the abyss, the underworld where the dead lived. And they would haunt the town because they would be free for one night out of the year. And they would be able on October 31st to go through town. And since they were spirits of devils and demons and dead people, they were mischievous. And they would do things like, vandalize your home and vandalize your property, or kill your crops, or kill your livestock. Goodness forbid, they kill off, your pigs and your cows, and that's how you make your money. So you would leave a grain offering, or you would leave a fruit offering. And then it went from that to sweetmeats, which was like baked goods. And that's where England and Ireland and Scotland adopted the practice of on October 31st giving out sweet treats to what? Individuals who would dress up as demons and ghosts and dead people. Why? Because what they were trying to do is appease or confuse the spirits.
Between everybody in the street to be among them.
There you go. So if you had to go over to Publix because you needed a half a gallon of milk, and Ingrid said, "Oh, Phil, run over to Publix and go get a half a gallon of milk," you'd say, "Well, hon, it's October 31st and it's dark out. Those spirits are out there. They might get me on the way to Publix." And so the two of you would say, "I got an idea. You dress up like a dead guy too, and they won't know that you're one of us." And so Philippe would dress up like a dead spirit or a demon or a goblin or a little monster, and he would run over to Publix a couple blocks away and get the half a gallon of milk for Ingrid. And when he would run into us, he certainly would, on October 31st, remember, they got to come out from the underworld. They got to interact with the people. He would run into them, and they'd look at me like, "Oh, all right, cool, he's one of us." Yeah, they give him the thumbs up, like, "Yeah, man, yeah, we're cleaning up tonight, right? I got my bag half full." And, Bill was like, "I'm on my way now to go get some stuff." And he'd go to the store, and he'd pretend to be one of them.
No.
And that's where we got the tradition of people dressing up as ghosts or demons or goblins and then going from house to house and asking for a treat. Or you're going to get a dirty trick played on you. And the people that lived in these homes were obligated to give a treat, lest something terrible in the form of a dastardly, mischievous trick be played on them. And that tradition really started up. Ancient Babylon moved through the Druids' Indo-European tradition, moved into Britannia, and became part of Scotland and Wales and England, particularly Ireland. And in Ireland, it really took off, and it really became a very important part of the tradition. But again, when the Catholic Church came along, the Catholic Church's idea was to get, when Constantine signed the papers overnight, you have a problem because he just by legal fiat, he's made everybody in the Roman Empire a member of the Catholic Christian Church. Now these pagans are worshiping the sun gods and the god of the dead, and they don't want any parts of Christianity, right? Because they could have become Christians if they had wanted to. So what does the Pope, Freudian slip there, what does the Constantine, the Pontifex Maximus of the Roman government have to do to get the pagans to want to be part of his new creation?
He's got to accept their traditions.
He syncretizes.
Disguise the traditions.
Say that again?
Disguise
Yeah.
the tradition.
There you go. He syncretizes and disguises the traditions. So Saturnalia, December 25th, you can have your alcohol-fueled sex orgy. But for the Christians, you'll call it what?
Christmas.
Christ Mass, which is the Latin phrase, which is the celebration of Christ. But for the pagans who are now part of the church, it's Saturnalia. And so they're like, oh, cool, we get to continue. Oh, yeah, and we're going to pay for it. The government's going to pay for your celebrations now. So they were all for it. So October 31st, which is the Day of the Dead in Druidism, November 1st to October 31st to November 1st is the day that the door to the underworld opens and the dead come out. That's the Day of the Dead celebration. That's a problem. How are you going to get that into Christianity? There you go, Ingrid. The Pope, who eventually succeeded the Emperor of Rome as the head of the Roman church system. Pontifex Maximus was a secular title that the Caesars, the emperors, held. And when the Pope came along to head up the Roman Catholic Church, he inherited that title of Pontifex Maximus. And so it was his job to tie or build a bridge between the pagans and the Roman church, state church system. And so what he would do is like, oh man, I got an idea. We'll make an All Saints Day. We'll call November 1st, instead of the Day of the Dead, we'll call it All Saints Day. And the night before that will be what? It'll be the evening before All Saints Day. So it's All Hallows Eve. And in the ancient Celtic tongue, you would call it Hallows Evening, or the evening before All Hallows Day became shortened and contracted. So instead of Hallow Evening, it became Halloween. That's where we got our present spelling and pronunciation for the night before All Hallows Day was All Hallows Eve, or in the Celtic tongue, Hallow Ian, Eve apostrophe E-N, or the contracted form of Hallows Evening, became Halloween. And so that's why October 31st, the day before the Day of the Dead, is now part of the Catholic tradition. So there is a frightening, is the only way to look at it, tradition in the Roman Catholic Church, so that on November 1st, you have, in these Catholic cathedrals around the world, skulls of humans collected and gathered and sort of acknowledged as being some kind of special ritual. And, All Hallows Eve is tied into the Day of the Dead. And so you've got a Day of the Dead celebration on November 1st in the Catholic Church, and in certain Catholic cathedrals, there's one, I believe it might be in Mount Sinai, where there's something like 100,000 human skulls in the basement. I've seen photographs of it, and they're sort of collected as some kind of a ritualized whatever, and they justify it by some crazy drawn out method. But really, what kind of a Christian church honors or reveres the corpses and the bones of dead human beings? So there you have it. So you have in the 500s Roman Catholic Pope Gregory the Great, they called him, adopted Druidism into Catholicism, and Samhain's Day was rechristened All Saints' Day. Pope Gregory III took October 31st and made it a mandatory observance in the Catholic Church. All Hallows Eve became a mandatory observance. So Pope Gregory III and Pope Gregory IV in the 500s had actually church law came into play, and it became a part and parcel of the Roman Catholic Church system. So we find out that dressing up as demons, going door to door, gathering food, sweets, Wicker Man, and they had, what's one of the other traditions? What about, anybody ever go to a bonfire on Halloween?
Yeah, I think so.
That was a big thing in the Midwest, and even up in New York. You get on like a hayride, and you ride out into the cornfields, and you have a big bonfire. And that bonfire really was also part and parcel of the Wicker Man ceremony. It was actually a bonfire where you would take your human sacrifice and you would burn it till there was nothing left but bones. And the Wicker Man in these large hay-like heaps where they would throw the sacrifices. If they couldn't build themselves a Wicker Man, they'd gather a bunch of hay together, and they put the human sacrifices and the animal sacrifices in the hay, set it on fire, and when the burning was all done, the next morning all you would find is the charred remains of the bone, because all the flesh would be consumed, and it became known as the bonfire, which was celebrated each October 31st. And so bonfires, going out,
Apple
riding.
bobbing?
Go ahead.
Bobbing for apples?
Bobbing for apples. That was another horrific tradition where, the idea was that, you'd have burning oil and you plunge the victim's face into the hot oil, and, they'd have to grab the apple or whatever. It's like this torturous device. And it's now symbolized by sticking your head in. And because where would you get these? It's a weird tradition as a kid. Bobbing for apples,
right.
Put apples in a bucket of water, you stick your head in there. Like, what does that have to do with Halloween and dressing up as a ghost and going out and get candy? I don't know. But
It just
people say
raises
that's
a lot of questions as far as a lot of the things that we do, a lot of the traditions that we have. When you think about that and just all the other weird things that we do sometimes, that I can think anything specifically, but.
Right, and we just did it. Why? Because that's
the tradition.
Like my parents, right? I accepted it as a kid because that's what my parents did. And they, I was a Midwestern tradition. I thought it had to do with Michigan's an agrarian state. We have cows and farms and farmland. We have pumpkin patches, and we go out to the pumpkin patch and we get up. And I didn't know that carving the pumpkin actually related back to the ancient Celtic Druids as well. And in Ireland, a tradition kind of came up where there is an old Irish folk tale about the guy named Jack, right? And Jack was a guy, he was this Irish guy walking through town one day, and he goes through Oak Grove, and he sees the devil. Look, it's the devil. He's climbing a tree, as if the devil hasn't anything better to do than climb trees in Ireland or whatever, but apparently he was climbing a oak tree in Ireland, and Jack saw him, and he said, aha, I know if you use the magical symbol of the cross, he's practicing witchcraft.
Sure.
He goes up to the tree, he says, I can trap the devil in the tree. And so he draws a cross onto the tree, supposedly magically trapping the devil in the tree. And when the devil saw it, it's like, Jack, take that cross off the tree so I can come down. This is all pagan, mythology. Catholic Church, I was watching a special on cable TV last night about exorcisms. But all the exorcisms were done by Catholics. And the Catholics were as big of pagans as the people they were exorcising. They were all involved in these pagan rituals, and the demons all were slapping the Catholic priests around because they didn't have any respect for them. But the priest thought, oh, I'll use my magic crucifix and some holy water, and we'll battle it out or whatever. But Jack is doing the same thing. So he puts this magic cross at the bottom of the tree, and the devil says, oh, Jack, I can't get out of the tree unless you take the cross off of there. So I want to get out of the tree. I'm getting tired. And so Jack, being an enterprising boy, says, I'll strike a deal with you. If, for whatever reason, I can't get into heaven after my life is over, I want you to make me a contractually binding agreement that you won't drag me into hell. If I can't get into heaven, I don't want you to take me into hell either. And so the devil, desperate to get out of the tree, says, okay, you drive a hard bargain, but okay, it's a deal. You won't go to hell. God finds out that Jack struck a bargain with the devil, and when Jack dies, 50 years later, he can't get into heaven. God's like, nope, we're not letting you in the pearly gates, St. Peter and all the Catholic mythology about heaven. You can't get in. And so we find Jack kind of walking along on the earth. He can't get into heaven, and the only other place to go is where? Hell. Yeah. And so, the devil wants to grab him and drag him in the pit, but he reminds him, hey, you remember that contract you had? You can't take me to hell. I could get in heaven, but I'm not going to hell either because you made a deal, and as if the devil would honor a contract that you drafted with him. Like, oh, geez, you're right, under, fair bargaining contractual principles, I have to honor the contract. And so the devil supposedly was so mad at him about not being able to drag him into hell, is he ran over to one of the hell pits, grabbed a burning coal, and threw it at him and said, get out of here, you loser. And Jack, having nowhere else to go, can't go to heaven, can't go to the underworld, can't go to the world above, can't go to the world below. So now he's stuck on earth, wandering around as a disembodied spirit. But because it's now in darkness, he takes a turnip gourd. And turnips are the gourd that's very common in Ireland and in Scotland and that part of the country, as opposed to in the North American area, it's pumpkins. So he took a turnip gourd, and he hollowed it out, and he carved a face into it, and he took the coal that the devil threw at him, dropped it in, and used it as a lantern to light his way as he's wandering the earth forever, in the dark. But he has the lantern to light his way, and it became known as in Irish as Jack's Lantern, or the Lantern o' Jack. The Lantern of Jack became the Jack o' Lantern. And when 1844, Irish potato famine drove a ton of Irish people out of Ireland because they couldn't grow crops anymore. So they came to the United States of America through New York City in droves. And what did they bring with them? Their traditions. And 99% of them were Roman Catholics. So they brought, the Irish Catholics came to the United States of America through New York City. Ellis Island, they brought with them their ancient traditions that were really Druidic traditions. And so the carved out turnip became a carved out pumpkin here in North America. And that's where we get the tradition of carving pumpkins. So we find out here we are, boom, the traditions of 2300 BC through the Celtic Druids in Samhain's day became adopted into the cultures wherever the Druidic priests went throughout Indo-Europe, through France, Germany, Great Britain, and the like. And ultimately, when Rome defeats the Celts during the Gallic Wars, Druidism goes underground. 47 to 300 AD, Druidism is syncretized into Roman paganism. Druidism, Pomona, which was the goddess of the Romans, became part and parcel of the Roman Catholic Church system. In point 6 on our 13-point diagram, 325 AD, Roman Catholic Church, state church system begins. 325 to 500 AD, the Druid Samhain is recast or Christianized as All Hallows Eve on October 31st. And then, point 8, 500 AD, through the Middle Ages, All Hallows Eve spreads to Britannia, which later became Great Britain, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and it became a Catholic sacrament thanks to Pope Gregory. And the jack-o'-lantern, the costumes of demons, trick-or-treating, bobbing for apples, all became traditions that were adopted into, the paganized church-state system, or state-church system of Roman Catholicism, which dominated Europe, didn't it? It dominated France, dominated Spain, didn't it? Well, Philippe, you lived in France. What's the dominant religious system?
Catholic.
The Catholic Church.
Spain, 98%. Italia, 90%.
Wow. And so Phil, who
Portugal.
grew up in Europe basically and lived throughout Europe as a professional soccer player, would you say that the Catholic Church was pretty dominant there?
Yeah, definitely.
No question about it. They built these incredible cathedrals, these monuments. All of the architecture of Europe is really influenced by the Roman Catholic Church system, right? And so now, point niner, we got an interesting thing occurs. You have this colonial push by Puritans, born-again evangelical Christians in England who are at odds with the King of England, not because they didn't want to pay taxes or they taxed our tea, so let's buy. No, they didn't want to be part of the state church system that had really started out as the Roman state church system, which was headquartered in Italy, which is where the Vatican was, spread to Spain, became the Spanish state church system, really Roman Catholicism. And when it got to England, the Catholics were at war with the Protestants to see who was going to control. And when the Protestants eventually won out, the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, really was a sort of Protestant form of Roman Catholicism. It was still the state system dictating which Bible you could use, dictating what your beliefs are, and dictating that the King of England is the head of the Church of England. Hence, is why they call it the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. And the Puritans were like the modern-day evangelical Britain, like we are. Sort of like the Albigenses and the Waldenses and Huguenots were during the Middle Ages. And they didn't want to be part of a state church system where the king of the nation is the head of the church. They wanted Jesus to be the head of the church. So the Puritans decided to give up their lives in England, and they volunteered to go abroad to do this new search for new lands, that was being financed by England. Hey, if you guys are willing to give up, your lives here in England, we'll finance you to go over to the new land, and we'll build colonies there, and you can have the land there, and you'll be free. And the Puritans did it. Why? Because they thought, it's gold in them thar hills, we'll get rich. No, they did it because they wanted to be free to worship Jesus the way the Bible says. And so the Puritans were really biblically fundamentalist Christians, came over in the Mayflower and so on and so forth. And when they came over, eventually the American Revolutionary War occurred. We know about the Boston Tea Party. It was a dispute over taxes on teas imported from Boston to England. And ultimately, it resulted in a war. And the colonies got their freedom, I think, through the providence of God, and the United States of America began. But one of the first things that they decided to do when the colonies became the independent United States of America is they banned, outlawed, Roman Catholicism was not welcome in the United States of America. And they specifically outlawed the practice of celebrating Halloween. Who knew that? Halloween was banned in 1776. That was considered a demonic practice that the paganized state church systems of Rome and England participated in, but that stuff was not allowed in the United States of America. It was not until the Irish potato famine of 1840 that the massive Irish that moved over to escape the economic poverty of not being able to grow crops in Ireland, they came to the United States of America and brought with them their Druidic traditions of Halloween. And even then, it wasn't openly accepted until about 1900. It took about 60 years, a little over 5 decades, for the Irish Catholic tradition of Halloween to sort of seep into the American ethos. And then other non-Irish Catholics began practicing this Day of the Dead celebration called Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, and dressing up in costumes, and people, oh, hey, that's kind of cool, like wearing costumes, and kids, that's cool, going out, knocking on the door, getting candy, and getting to dress up like a scary monster, that's fun. So kids began adopting that in the 1900s in the United States of America. By the time I, came along, decades later, it was part of what I thought was the Midwestern American tradition of going door to door and getting candy. it really started out as ancient Babylonian paganism that syncretized itself into Europe through the Celtic Druids, that syncretized itself into the European states through the Catholic Church system, and eventually snuck into the United States of America when the ban on Roman Catholicism finally ended in about 1840 with the Irish potato famine. Remember the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and they would not allow Roman Catholics to be part and parcel of the signers. All those guys were Protestants or deists at the very least, which is why the establishment of Georgetown University is the first Catholic university in 1769. That was a big deal, man. Or 1789, that is, because there were no Catholic universities or outposts in the United States of America until then. And so that's where these traditions come from. So again, we look right down through our timeline from the Middle Ages, Britannia, Catholic sacraments, 1776, eventually 1840, Irish potato famine, Irish Catholics come to the United States of America. Around between 1840 and 1900, the United States rejects Samhain, now called Halloween, in Anglican or English version of it. It's not accepted until after 1900. Halloween begins gaining acceptance, and finally, our 13th point, Halloween becomes the second most popular holiday in the whole world, and the most popular holiday for adults in the world. As of 2012, there was a annual income generation of $8.2 billion with a B dollars in Halloween sales. Now we're 2015. We're probably closer to 10 or 11 billion dollars per year in Halloween sales. Only Christmas in the porn industry generates more annual income than Halloween. How about that? How about those two juxtapositions? Christmas and pornography. Both part and parcel are really different sides of the same coin. I hate to say it, but Christmas really, we can talk about it some other time, is really part of ancient Babylonian paganism as well. When pagan practices were syncretized into Europe, again, Saturnalia, which was an ancient sex, celebration, became part and parcel of the Roman Catholic Church system. So now, let's take a look and see, what does Scripture say? And we can quickly look at some of the verses. Now, I've given you a lot of information about the historical background of Halloween, but does the Bible say anything about, well, you can't find trick-or-treating in the Bible, so you can't say that it's against the law of God. And that's true. That's a good point. Halloween is not specifically mentioned by name in the Bible, nor is trick-or-treating, nor is bobbing for apples, nor is internet porn, right? That's not mentioned specifically in the Bible, but there are other things that are mentioned specifically in the Bible that we can use our intellect and reasonably make an inference as to whether or not these things are admissible or acceptable. So we can kind of take a look, and since we already have the verses laid out for us in the outline, Ingrid, you can go ahead and read for us John chapter 8, verse 44.
Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar, and the father of it. So, the reason why I laid that verse out for us first is to ask you guys a question. Is the devil real?
Yes.
Or is he a metaphor?
No metaphor here.
Real.
He's real.
A real person. Jesus was under the impression that the devil, remember we talked about Jack and trapping the devil in the tree and all the people, that's a make-believe story that, that was made up for kids. The devil's not real. He doesn't really exist. But Jesus says the devil is a real person and he can influence people. So, we're warned to look out for him. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Phil?
Chapter 5, verse 8. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about, seeking whom he may devour.
Okay, so now Peter is warning us, saying that the devil is our adversary, and he's walking about, even throughout the earth. And the term Satan is the Hebrew word for adversary. So he's saying your opponent, Satan, the devil, is like a roaring lion walking around the earth seeking whom he may devour. Peter believed Satan, the devil, was a real entity as well. In Ephesians, Paul wrote what? Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2. What does he say there, Steve? And I can give you one of the outlines. It's all laid out for you that way. No, I got extras. I came prepared. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, okay. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2. Where in time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience.
So who is this prince of the power of the air, Steve?
Satan. So,
it says he's a spirit. The fact that he's a spirit does not mean he is not real. Right? He is a spirit being. Spirit beings do walk the earth, and they do interact with people. Steve, go ahead and continue in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. What does Paul continue to warn the Ephesians?
For we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
Speaking of spiritual wickedness in high places, Jesus had an encounter with the chief spirit of wickedness, and he took him to a high place, and that's located for us in Matthew chapter 4, and I'll just read for us. In verse 1, it says, Then Jesus was led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And then the devil taketh him up into the holy city and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple, a high place. And Jesus said to him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And again the devil taketh him up to an exceedingly high mountain, and therewith with him showed him all of the kingdoms of the world and the glory of all of them. And it says, And saith unto him, All these things I will give to you, Jesus, if you will fall down and worship me. And then Jesus says unto Satan, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Verse 11, Then the devil leaveth him, and behold, the angels came and ministered unto him, Jesus. So what do we have there? We have Jesus here on earth in human flesh is interacting face to face with Satan. And Satan has supernatural powers. He can transport him from the top of the temple to the top of a mountain and show him all the kingdoms of the world. And they had a debate. I'll give you all these things if you bow down and worship me. Jesus was like, no, you worship only God. And Satan departed from him. And then angels came and ministered to Jesus. So the spirit world is real, according to Jesus. So if we are followers of Jesus, then we got to believe that these things are true. Now, let's take a look and see 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Steve, that's really your, you've got your trademark, copyright pending, government trademark office. So give us 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9.
Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders.
And verse 23, Daniel chapter 8, verses 23 through 25, Steve.
And in latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentence shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people.
Verse 25.
And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand.
Wow, so we find out in those verses that Satan has an actual biogenetic son. We learned about that in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 and 16, that Satan will have genetic seed. And that's this individual that John calls the Antichrist. And it says that the Antichrist, whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all of the powers of Satan. And he uses signs and powers and lying wonders, and he understands dark sentences, and that's why he's called the Prince of Darkness. And it says that his policy will be to use craft. What kind of craft? He's not talking about, gluing, cardboard stuff and sprinkles on a piece of paper like we did in kindergarten. Witchcraft. Witchcraft is real. Demonic powers are real. Demonic entities are real. We find that out in Scripture. Now, let's talk about demons. So you dress your kids up like a little demon,
Mm.
you know. And it's funny because it's not funny, but it's ironic. I was watching that. They did that documentary on Discovery Channel or whatever it was on exorcisms, and the Catholic Church exorcised this kid who was the basis for the movie The Exorcist, which was filmed actually on the campus of Georgetown University in Washington. And stairs that the priest was thrown down by the demon, I would run up and down the stairs as a workout because it's the steepest set of stairs I think anywhere in North America. It like goes almost completely vertical. But it was interesting that the kid who originally got possessed because he was playing with a Ouija board. His parents allowed his mom's sister to bring him a Ouija board and teach him how to use it. And next thing you know, the kid winds up demon possessed, and there the Catholic priests, the Jesuits are going to war. Took 30 days to exorcise this demon. And the only reason the demon left, if you get to the end of the documentary, is because the kid who was a Protestant decided to join the Catholic Church as a result. He said, will you get baptized? And the only thing we can do is baptize you in the Catholic Church. And when he finally agreed to do that, the demon was like, okay, I'll leave. And he left, having accomplished his goal of dragging this poor, deluded kid who's involved in the occult and becoming a lifelong member of the Roman Catholic Church. So Satan is manipulating the Jesuit exorcists to get people into the Catholic Church. But we find out that demons are real. And we learned that first, Ingrid, from Jesus in the Bible. So tell us, Ingrid, Matthew chapter 12, verse 43 through 45.
When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places, seeking rest, and findeth none. Then he saith, I will return into my house from whence I came out. And when he is come, he findeth it empty, swept, and garnished. Then goeth he, and taketh himself 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. Even so shall it be also unto this wicked generation.
Now, Ingrid has just quoted Jesus of Nazareth, the guy who created the universe. Now, Jesus seemed to be under the impression that demons were spirits that can walk around. It says, an unclean spirit has gone out of a man and walketh through the dry places. Does that sound similar to the story of Jack-o'-lantern?
How about that?
Right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't all just a myth. It wasn't just a child's fairy tale. So when parents are dressing up their kids as a jack-o'-lantern or imitating putting a jack-o'-lantern in front of the house, they are, in essence, imitating not a childish folk tale that has no basis in fact or reason, but they are imitating a real event that Jesus warned us about. He says these unclean spirits search around dry places seeking rest and finding none. They want to go into the houses and ultimately into the bodies of human beings to find rest and to live there. And so Jesus warns us about those individuals. And, Ingrid's gonna tell us a little bit more that, Jesus said about demons. In Luke chapter 8, verses 26 to 33, Ingrid, go ahead and finish this up with what Jesus related through Luke about demons and demon possessions.
And they arrived at the country of the Gadarenes, which is over against Galilee. And when he went forth to land, there met him out of the city a certain man, which had devils a long time, and wore no clothes, neither abode in any house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God Most High? I beseech thee, torment me not. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For oftentimes it had caught him, and he was kept bound with chains and in fetters, and he brake the bands, and was driven out of the devil into the wilderness. And Jesus asked him, saying, What is thy name? And he said, Legion, because many devils were entered into him. And they besought him that he would not command them to go out into the deep. And there was there an herd of many swine feeding on the mountain, and they besought him that he would suffer them to go into them, and he suffered them. Then went the devils out of the man and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the lake and were choked.
That's a scary verse right there. Verse 33 of Luke chapter 8.
Mm-hmm.
Then went the devils out of the man and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the lake, and they were choked. Now, I don't know whether the demons killed the swine. I think what happened is when the swine realized that they had just been invaded by wicked demonic entities, they said, I'd rather be dead than to run around with these horrific monsters living inside of us. This is a clear indication that they are intelligent, sentient beings. They were negotiating with Jesus, like, oh, Son of God, you come to torture us before the time. Don't send us back to the bottomless pit, to Tartarus, where the fallen angels are being kept until the day of judgment in the lake of fire. Let us go into those pigs over there. And Jesus allowed it. And they went out of the man and went into a bunch of pigs. And the pigs said, we'd rather be dead than, we'll wallow in mud and feces and muck. But we've got certain standards we won't go below. We're not allowing those guys to come cohabiting us. We're out of here. And they killed themselves to escape from the demons. That is a frightening concept. So when we dress up our kids as little demons and send them around the neighborhood, imitating what Jesus warned us that the demons really do, not just on October 31st, especially on October, but all year. They're wandering around doing what? Looking for a place. Like, oh, Steve, he's involved. Ouija board, tarot card, he's involved in the occult. I have legal grounds. Interesting what the demon said to the Jesuit priests as they were being attempted to exorcise and couldn't do it for 30 days. Is that the demon said to him, the guy who did the exorcism that became the basis for the story in the movie The Exorcist, he says, we're here because we have a right to be. And they were laying the law down. We have a legal right to be in this boy's body because his parents, one, opened the door by allowing him to participate in the occult, and the kid willingly chose to play with that Ouija board and open the door. We have a right to be in here. And the time I mentioned before when I had the girl that I was sharing the gospel with or whatever, basically it was the same story. And he was like, hey, it's not like we bum rushed this girl. We had a right to be here. She was involved in homosexuality and drug use, and that was the door. We just walked into it, but she opened it. And so it seems to be that these entities are looking for humans to interact with, to cohabit in, and they need a legal justification to do it, which can be the door being opened through a number of means, but certainly through a willing involvement in the occult. These types of things happen. And so should we be taking our 8, 9-year-old kid and teach him that that's a fun thing to do? Because when they're out there searching around looking for, they see 8-year-old little Susie or Bobby, hey, he's dressed up just like me. He's pretending to be me.
Wow.
Oh, he thinks I'm cool. And I'll become his special friend. Next thing you know, your little Bobby or Susie or Johnny has a special friend he's telling you about. And you're like, oh, such a fertile imagination, these 8-year-olds. They're watching too many movies and playing too many video games, but they're not playing games. They've really encountered something. And so, the question is, should we be allowing our children, should we be encouraging our kids as Christians to be participating in ancient satanic, occultic, pagan practices? Well, Phil is going to tell us that Paul wrote a letter to the Corinthians, and he gave them a warning about engaging in the practices of the pagans. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 20 and 21. Phil, what does Paul tell the Corinthian church?
But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. And I would not that he should have fellowship with devils. He cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. He cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and of the table of devils.
Uh-oh. Well, wait a minute. Now, that seems to me that Paul, who's the apostle to the church, is laying the law down. He's saying the things that the pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils. And you can't do that because I wouldn't have you fellowshipping with it. He's saying if you engage in ceremonies or rituals that are geared towards honoring and acknowledging devils, you are having fellowship with them. You are fellowshipping with devils. You are partakers of the Lord's table on one day and also the table of the devil. He says, you can't do that. He says, that's an abomination. Now, Phil, go into the Old Testament, if you would. Now, tell us, about 1,000 years earlier, God had warned the forebears of Paul the Apostle through the Old Testament prophets what to do and what not to do in terms of being part and parcel of the people of God. Leviticus chapter 17, verse 7. What does it say there, Phil?
And they shall no more offer the sacrifices unto devils, after whom they have gone a whoring. This shall be a statute forever unto them throughout their generations.
Wait, now how long is this statute for?
Forever.
Oh, okay, so even though this was 1,000 years before Jesus, when God tells the people of Israel through the law of Moses in the book of Leviticus, they shall no more make sacrifices unto devils, after whom they have gone a whoring. This shall be a statute forever unto them throughout the generations. So if you're a part of the people of God, you are forever forbidden from engaging in practices that will include sacrifices to devils, which is what bobbing for apples are, which is what handing candy out on Halloween is. Since you're already there, Phil, go ahead and read Psalm. Finish this up in this section. Psalm chapter 106, verses 37 and 38.
Yea, they sacrifice their sons and their daughters unto devils.
Oh, did you guys see? You guys thought I was making it up. You thought all that stuff I was saying about Nimrod and, Wicker Man and sacrificing. No, the Bible says the same thing. These Nimrodic practices start in 2500 BC, where you would appease the god of the sky, who is the god of death as well, duality, black versus white, good versus evil. Sun god is also the god of the abyss. You sacrificed your children to him. And that was going on in the Old Testament. And God sent the prophets and even had the psalmist write down in there. And Phil just told us, yes, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils. I didn't make it up. See, you guys thought I was making it up. Like Herb with that hyperbolic Herb, making that stuff up again, trying to make the story sound good. Except we find it's right there in the word, in the book of Psalms. People think, oh, I love the song.
So,
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lay down beside peaceful waters. But they don't read the part in Psalm 106, verse 37, that says, yeah, they were sacrificing their sons and daughters to devils. And Phil, verse 38, what else does he say?
And shed innocent blood, even the blood of the sons and of their daughters, whom they sacrificed unto the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood.
Wait a minute, did you hear what Phil just read? This is the God of Israel speaking to the people of Israel, his chosen people. Goodness forbid what the pagans were doing. This is just the stuff that the Israelis adopted from the pagans by being in close contact with them. It says, they shed innocent blood. He's not talking about sending the Israeli army over to kill the Midianites. No, he says even the blood of their own sons and daughters, their children, were being sacrificed. Not at war. Oh, I'm going to send my 12-year-old son to go out and fight the Philistines. And he died. Okay, it was a sacrifice, but it was good. No, they were taking their children and sacrificing them to devils, to the idols of Canaan. And it says the entire land was polluted with the blood of the children. I told you. See, you guys thought I made it up. Nimrod instituted human children blood sacrifices in 2500 BC. And eventually, the pagan nations surrounding the land of Israel adopted those practices. And shockingly, horrifically, unbelievably, the nation of Israel adopted those same practices because they were trying to be good neighbors. Like all our pagan neighbors do it. Let's kill some of our kids. Not all of them, but get Johnny and Susie and let David and Kelly stay. Who's got the best grades? Okay, well, whoever's got the F this year, you're getting sacrificed this year, kid. Think about that. This is stuff that was actually happening in ancient Israel.
And the thing is, it was happening after they'd been led out of Egypt, after God had done so much as far as, parting the sea, freeing them from Pharaoh, leading them through the wilderness, and this is how they returned his favor.
Wow. So I'll depart from that section, but suffice it to say that if you are participating in any ceremony or ritual, you are as good as sacrificing your sons and daughters to devils.
I even back in Corinthians where it says, you cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and of the table of devils. Makes me kind of even wrong. Like, you can't be on both sides. If you're partaking in it, I think you've made your choice and decided on which table you want to,
Wow, if you're comfortable continuing in it, after you've been warned, what does it say? There's no longer any sacrifice for sins after you've been warned of it. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, but I think it means that if you're born again, you have the Holy Spirit. I was an ignorant kid and was doing it as a kid, going to cemeteries with my bag of candy and my monster mask and dressed up as the devil. But I didn't know any better. Now I know better, so I don't do it anymore.
Right.
Phil.
My question is, the church in America against Halloween, do they commend that? Do they?
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, I've been in very few churches. I've been in a couple of smaller evangelical churches. I remember when I was in law school, we had a small, we were very proactive. We did street evangelism. What we did is we would have an All Saints night party. So even that is kind of like, oh, well, everybody else is having a Halloween party. We'll do the same stuff, have music and food and candy, so that we can be participating in the fun of the world too.
Yeah.
And then even that's a little bit of a compromise. But as a general rule now, you don't even see that anymore. At least I don't.
Yeah.
When I'm driving through Miami Shores and I see those big Presbyterian churches and multi-million-dollar structures that Halloween party tonight at such and so, First Presbyterian Church of Miami Shores. Halloween party at the First Church of Baptist United such and so. United Church of Christ Halloween Festival all week long.
Yeah.
Bring your scariest costumes and pumpkin carving time. So you see the church joining right in with Babylon. And that is part and parcel of what was warned by Paul and Jesus, Matthew 24, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that in the last days, the so-called Christian church would be adopting the practices of the pagans, even devil worshiping and worshiping the Day of the Dead. And it's exactly the same scenario that we saw in ancient Israel. God led them out of Egypt, as Steve said, gave him the law so that they could be smarter than all the pagans. The pagans didn't have a law. They didn't know any better. Israel knew better, and they still eventually adopted the practices. Why? Because there is a God of this world who's in control of everything, and he can eventually influence the minds of the leaders of the nations, who then influence the minds of the subjects of the kingdom. And the people eventually began to practice the pagan practices of Satanism, and they usually go through the king first. So the king of Israel got married to Jezebel. She wasn't a Jew, but oh man, the king of Israel had Jezebel having him making sacrifices to pagan Canaanite idols, and then the people adopted it because the king adopted it. And so now we've got a president of the United States. John F. Kennedy stands up and says, no, we're not going to have that. He gets killed. And then he gets replaced by a guy who's willing, okay, I'm not going to get killed. I'm going to And so if you get the head, what does it say? Kill the head and the body will follow or whatever. You chop off the head of a snake. You don't go to a rattlesnake and chop his rattler off. He's going to be really pissed. He's going to bite you and you're going to die. You chop his head off, that's it. So, Satan's plan, get the rulers, get the leaders, and then the people follow after. So we find out that participating in rituals that are geared to honor devils, which really do exist, is the same as having fellowship with him, according to Jesus. So I don't know, he's kind of an authority.
It's like, too, you give him the green light, almost like playing with a Ouija board or whatever else.
Yeah.
Like, you participate in it, I have a right.
Yeah. So now, let's fast forward a little bit, because we're running out of time here. Witches. Now, are they real? We little girls. I mean, my sister, the little Susie from next door, the guys. I wanted to be a superhero mostly, so at least I was, Batman or Captain America or something. But the little girls all want to be witches, right? Now, are witches real? Now, what does the Bible have to say about witchcraft? And let's find out, Steve. Genesis chapter, Ingrid kind of told us about that, so we'll let Ingrid do the honors since she is a member of that particular gender. Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7.
Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise.
To make one what?
Wise.
The first wicked. Here we have it, right here.
She took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons.
So here we see it right here, the genesis of the very first witch ever anywhere in the world. And Ingrid had told us about it a little bit earlier, and this is what she was talking about. She desired to be wise through occultic knowledge, which is exactly what Wicca is all about. And she became, and as soon as she took that satanic gambit, the first thing she did, Steve, was seduced her husband and caused him to fall. And the headship of the planet Earth, which was invested in the man, fell into the hands of Satan through the power of a woman involved in witchcraft. Do we have the same thing happening in ancient Israel with Queen Jezebel and the king of Israel, who had torn down the high places that the Lord had told him, these satanic places were torn, and then he built them back up? Why? Because Jezebel told him to. Wow. So we find out that Satan, using a brilliant military tactic, uses the Achilles heel of the man, which is the woman. Her beauty, his love for her, it's something that can almost not be overcome. And Satan goes through the woman to dominate the man, because the woman feels like, oh, hey, the guy's got he's got more power than me. I want to be the head guy in charge. And God, what's this male patriarchal father figure in heaven? There should be a female God. And that's why feminism is all throughout the Hollywood industry. I was watching Supergirls, a new show they have. Goodness forbid, man. If it isn't just feminist occultic propaganda, wrapped up in superhero clothes. And I'm like, oh, I'm a sucker for superheroes because I read them as a kid. And I was like, man, I don't remember it being this feminist thing when I was a kid reading this stuff. And that's what it is, It's a way Satan gets in under our armor. And he knows that if we see him coming, we're going to raise the shield and the sword and go to war. But if we don't see it coming, we see it disguised in a different way. He catches us unawares. Now, we take the natural progression of the very first witch in the Garden of Eden. I hate to say that, Genesis chapter 3. And we see, what does that ultimately morph into? What does that, to use the word evolution, evolve into? Many centuries later, Steve's going to tell us, and we're going to be addressing this in detail next week in Revelation 17. Steve, what does Revelation 17 tell us about this whole Mystery Babylon system, which is the goddess worship feminism system? Give us Revelation chapter 17, verses 1 through 3, and then 5 and 6.
I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. And and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth.
There we have it.
And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration.
So Satan, in the very beginning, Genesis 3, uses the woman, and then he takes that archetypal military tactic and he replays it again and again and again through Jezebel, through all of these other would-be women gods,
Solomon,
Semiramis, and then Isis, and then all of these Artemis and Diana for the Greeks and the Roman, this powerful sky goddess female entity that ultimately becomes known as Mystery Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Not just a religious system, but a spirit. I've described it in the past as Satan in drag. He dresses as a woman and becomes the sky goddess to rival the patriarchal father god, which is the God of Israel, the God of the Bible. And he goes to war. Steve, a little further, in Revelation chapter 18, we find out that John writes and is revealed to him a little bit more about this Mystery Babylon, whorish woman. Verses 7 and 8, and they give us 23 and 24.
How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously. So much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine. And she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and of all that were slain upon the earth.
Wow, so we find out this Mystery Babylon, she's doing what? She's killing prophets of God, she's killing the saints, she's responsible for the death of those that are dying on the earth during the tribulation period, and God's going to ultimately judge her. And he's going to judge all of the occult. Revelation chapter 21, verse 8, Steve.
But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death.
So people involved in the occult, sorcerers, sort of a wizard or a magus, he's going to eventually wind up in the lake of fire. What about the witches? Ingrid, Exodus chapter 22, verse 18, God gives the law to Moses, leads the people out of Egypt, and we find out that he gives this straightforward and direct comment. Verse 18 of Exodus 22.
Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live.
Uh-oh, there were witches back in the day, and under the law of Moses, they were put to death. And Exodus chapter 7, verse 11 and 12, Ingrid.
11 and 12. Yep. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, now the magicians of Egypt. They also did in like manner with their enchantments. For they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods.
So there were sorcerers in the land that had real powers. They weren't just doing magic tricks. Now this that Ingrid's going to give us, 1 Samuel, she's going to relate a passage of an account from 1 Samuel chapter 28. One of the creepiest passages, completely appropriate for Halloween. They should be playing this in the houses throughout the night on October 31st and let the kids think about this. Ingrid, give that to us. Verses 7 through 15 and 16 through 19.
Then said Saul unto his servants, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I might go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. And Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment. And he went with 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit. and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. And the woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he had cut off those that have unfamiliar spirits and wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life, to cause me to die? And Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord liveth, there shall be no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Then said the woman, Whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, Bring me up Samuel. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. And the king said unto her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. And he said unto her, What form is he of? And she said, An old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed himself. And Samuel said to Saul, Why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am sore distressed. I have called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I shall do. Then said Samuel, Wherefore then dost thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from thee, and is become thine enemy? Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel unto thee, Israel with thee, into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me.
Wow. Now, what he was saying is, I'm in Hades because I'm dead. Tomorrow you're going to be dead too because of what you've done. So what we find in this passage here in 1 Samuel is that, one, there are real witches.
Right.
The witch at Endor was a well-known spiritist who talked to dead people or demons, familiar spirits or demons, disguising themselves as dead humans. And so King Saul dresses himself up in a disguise. Why? Because there was a law in the land that said, if you practice witchcraft, you will be put to death under the orders of the king. So he violated the law of God as the head of the nation of Israel and goes to the witch. Why? Because he had ticked off God by trying to be a priest and a king and take the role of the Messiah, which really only belongs to Jesus. And he tried to play that role, and he was judged, and God stopped talking to him. And he made his situation worse by going to the witch at Endor and saying, predict the future for me. Tomorrow I got to fight with the Philistines, and I want to know, who's going to win. So I need my old advisor, Samuel. Call up from the dead Samuel, even though he knew that is a direct violation of Leviticus and the Mosaic law. You should not speak to the dead or seek to speak to the dead. And he commands his woman, she's like, you're King Saul. You'll kill me. He says, I promise you, no harm will come to you. Do it for me.
I promise you by God, no harm will
Right? And so she does it. And she's trying to get her demonic familiar spirit to come and perform his magic tricks, which is how she made her money. But God supervenes and actually sends the real Samuel in spirit form. The ghost of Samuel gets sent by God out of Hades. And she's terrified. Because she's like, that's not my familiar spirit. That's not my demon. I know my God. That's the real deal. I didn't do that. God did it. And Samuel says, because you've done this, tomorrow you and your kids will be here with me. You're going to be dead. And so what happens? We find out in 1 Chronicles.
There's your trick-or-treat scenario right there. He dresses up. He goes to the witch at Endor. Tricks her. And his thing.
How about that?
Yeah.
Well, his trick comes the next day. In 1 Chronicles chapter 10, we find out that the Lord allowed Saul to go into battle with the Philistines. And it says the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was wounded by the archers. And so Saul took a sword and fell upon it, And it says, it came to pass on the morrow that when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his sons fallen on Mount Gilboa, just as God had ordained for them to die. They were judged less than 24 hours later. And it said, and when they had stripped him, the Philistines, they took his head and his armor and sent it in the land of the Philistines. They cut his head off. And they put his armor in the house of their gods and fastened his head in the temple of Dagon. The fish god that the Philistines worshipped had a new ornament in his trophy case, which was the head of the king of Israel. And Saul died. Why? Because he wasn't as good in battle? No. He died for his transgression when he committed against the Lord, even against the word of the Lord, which he kept not, and also for asking counsel of one that had a familiar spirit to inquire. But God allowed his head to be cut off by his enemies. The king of Israel that was hand-selected by God, God allowed his devil-worshipping enemies to chop his head off and hang it as an ornament in the temple of Dagon as punishment for what? For inquiring of a witch and trying to speak to the dead. God takes all of this very seriously. God takes witchcraft very serious, and we find that out throughout Scripture. And there's so many other verses that I could have you look to. But Philippe, if you would, on page 11, let's take a look and see what God says in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 6, at the top of the page.
And the soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits and after wizards, to go a warring after them, I will even set my face against that soul, and will cut him off from among his people.
How much clearer could it be than that? In Leviticus, he says, anybody who goes a whoring, who's one of my servants, he's talking about the land of Israel, he says, the soul that goes and seeks after these familiar spirits and goes a whoring after them because you're betrothed to me now, Israel. He's letting the pagans do what they want because their judgment comes later. But Israel acts as a whore. If you're going after other gods by talking to familiar spirits, I'm going to set my face against you and cut you off, which means I'm going to kill you. Deuteronomy, what does he say there, Phil? Verses 10 through 12 of Deuteronomy 18.
There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that use divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord thy God does drive them out from before you.
Wow, so we find out that God is warning Israel to stop doing this. Witchcraft is real. They were actually interacting with witches who were attempting to talk to the dead. What they were talking to are disembodied spirits of the Nephilim who are haunting the lands, pretending to be dead humans, and deceiving people into the occult and into witchcraft. And eventually God thought it was such a great threat, he'd rather end their lives physically than allow them to bring that sort of spiritual infection into the land of the people. Bottom of page 11, Steve. Jeremiah the prophet, what does he say about worshiping trees in the light? Druidism. Is Druidism as bad as I make it out to be, or is it just, I'm up in arms over certain things, and I got something against oak trees? Jeremiah chapter 2, verses 26 and 27, Steve. Bottom of page 11.
That the house of Israel, ashamed, they, their kings, their princes, and their priests, and the prophets, say to a stock.
And stock is the old King James version for the word for tree. Saying to a tree,
Thou art my father, and to a stone, thou hast brought me forth.
Wow. Even back then, Druidism, I'm telling you, Druidism isn't something that just started in Ireland in the 1500s or the 1200s. It was popular then, but that stuff started back before Israel was founded as a nation, worshiping trees and rocks and saying to a rock, you are my father, and to a tree, you're my mother, I love you. and hugging. You know, that's where we get the phrase, the tree huggers now.
Sure.
You know, the liberal sort of politicals, they're in favor of, you know, I'm a vegetarian, but they're vegetarians and they don't wear animals and they hug trees.
Wow.
That tree hugger comment is really an allusion to the ancient practice of Druidism, worshiping gods that live in the tree. They're hugging it because they think that tree is their god. And so we find that Jeremiah says, you know, don't engage in engaging with sorcerers. Now, when we get to the New Testament, we find out that it's condemned. In the book of Acts, you know, Paul, Acts chapter 13, you know, verse 10, it says, O full of all subtlety and all mischief, thou child of the devil, thou enemy of all righteousness, wilt thou not cease to pervert the straight ways of the Lord? Now, Paul is talking to a sorcerer named Elymas, and Elymas was trying to interact with Paul, and I think he was trying, this might have been the guy who was trying to purchase the power of the Holy Spirit, and Paul was like not having any of it. And so the point of mentioning those verses is that these things are real. The things that we are celebrating on October 31st, it's not child's play. It's like, Herb, you're all up in arms over it. It's just a child's game. It's make-believe. It's like Santa Claus. No, it's different. Santa Claus doesn't exist. Demons do exist. Witches do exist. Disembodied spirits of the dead do exist. Demonic devils do exist and do try to inhabit people, and we know that because it's in the Word of God. And we find out that, we don't have time to go into in detail, but the whole story of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Babylonians, not the original Babylon, which was headed by Nimrod, but the later iteration of Babylon headed by Nebuchadnezzar, God said that to teach him humility, he allowed him to morph into be like a Lon Chaney in The Wolfman. You guys remember that B movie from the 1940s? Lon Chaney would turn into Wolfman and he'd grow claws.
Yeah.
That's exactly what the Bible says happened to Nebuchadnezzar. It says he began to grow feathers out of his back like a bird, and his fingernails turned into bird's claws. And he lived out in the wilderness for 7 years. That's not, saying, he let his hair grow long. No, it says his hair changed into feathers. Feathers, from a taxonomic, zoological standpoint, feathers are made from keratin. Keratin is not where we get hair from, right? The feathers that a bird has are like hollowed out bones and things, right? So something genetically, metaphysically changed in this king Nebuchadnezzar. So we find out shape-shifting changes from men into beasts. We find that actually does happen. And ultimately, we find out that the Rephaim, Steve, you're on a roll today, the descendants of the Nephilim were known as the Rephaim. What is the literal meaning of that Hebrew word?
Oh, the dead ones?
The dead ones. The dead ones who cannot live. But wait, they can walk and talk and interact with people because their spirits cannot be born again. They're alive, but they're dead while they're alive. Dead men walking. That's why they were referred to as the Rephaim. They could walk and talk and eat and kill, but they were considered the dead ones because they were part of that underworld kingdom, and they can never have part in eternal life with Jesus. So we know that the dead ones do live and walk among us.
That's when moment Jesus said, "Let the dead bury the dead."
Oh, that's a good point. Remember that when Jesus was calling the disciples?
Yeah.
And one guy, I gotta go bury my grandpa. He died. I gotta say, let the dead bury their own dead. You come and follow me. And that's exactly what we as Christians are. Isn't that what we're called to do? He's like, look, put aside all that stuff in the world. Yeah, I know that your Celtic Druid grandpa used to do the Day of the Dead and the Night of the Dead and all that stuff and bobbing for apples. But let them do that. Now you come and follow me. Now, that's the choice that each one of us is made, is forced to make. If we claim to be born again Christians, and listen, I know that this message will go over like a ton of bricks with the world in South Beach or in Greenwich Village, where Halloween is the biggest day of the year in Greenwich Village, and on South Beach and Coconut Grove as well. I know that that's not going to go over the New Worlders and the occultists and the Wiccans. on the witchcraft calendar, and on the Satanist calendar, Samhain or Samhain, it's a holy high day.
Sure.
It's on their calendar. It's also on the Roman Catholic calendar too. They try to change the name, All Saints Day or All Hallows Eve, but it's Samhain, and that's on all of the occultic calendars. And that we still practice that, if you're in the world, I can understand.
Right.
But if you've come out of the world and become born again and you're a follower of Jesus Christ, the example you're setting to the world is what? Worshiping the devil is okay. Fellowship, the devil is fun, man. He has the best music. He has the hottest women. Oh, man, he has the coolest moral rules. So I'm going to hang out with him when right? But like Phil said, okay, but there are certain consequences eventually. You play with fire, ultimately you get burned, right? Right? And so
For sure.
this is the message for born-again Christians. Come out from them, the Bible is telling us. And so, I'll conclude it up with, I remember the very first time I ever gave this verse, and I remember the verse that stood out to Steve was one of the ones that we're going to look at now. In fact, let's let Steve finish up with Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 16 through 21, bottom of page 15.
They provoked him to jealousy.
And that hymn is referring to God.
God, right? To jealousy with strange gods. With abominations provoked they him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God. To gods whom they knew not. To new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. Of the rock that begat thee thou art unmindful, and hast forgotten God that formed thee. And when the Lord saw it, he abhorred them because of the provoking of his sons and of his daughters. And he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end shall be. For they are a very froward generation, children in whom is no faith. They have moved me to jealousy with that which is not God. They have provoked me to anger with their vanities. And I will move them to jealousy with those which are not a people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation.
In essence, what God is saying is that he's angry at the nation of Israel because they're teaching their children to interact and worship the false gods. It's like you're teaching the kids to do it. They don't know any better. They're learning from the parents. I'm going to have to judge them. I'm going to have to punish them. I'm going to have to be angry at them. And then we switch back to the New Testament. Basically, we finish up with Paul. In Ephesians, he wrote a letter to the Ephesians. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11, I think sums up perfectly exactly what God's position is, what Jesus' position is with regards to anything like Halloween, anything like adultery, anything like pornography. Is there Christian pornography? Can you engage in Christian pornography?
I'm sure there's probably some.
In the name of Jesus first, and then you wear a cross, or you do the sign of the cross, and then you engage in sex with an animal, put it on videotape, and sell it. That's Christian pornography. No, you can't. Paul says, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. That's what Paul is saying. Paul is saying, expose the unfruitful works of darkness. So you got to ask yourself, Steve, Philippe, Ingrid, people out there, Mama Kelly, anybody who's out there in video land watching, is a holiday that's based upon ancient worship of Satan in the form of Samhain, the god of the dead. Is there anything fruitful that comes from that? Is that a work of the Lord in the light, or is that what the Lord will call a work of darkness?
Unfruitful work of darkness.
Oh, well, Jiminy Christmas, there you go. Is it an unfruitful work of darkness to worship the God of the dead, who's really Satan in disguise? How many children have been sacrificed throughout the nations over the years? And continuing, if you study the occult seriously, you find out that Charles Manson and David Berkowitz and all these so-called pathological killers that just go crazy and start killing me, that these are tied into occultic high holidays, including Halloween, and human sacrifices right here in the United States happen every Halloween. And then it'll come up as an unsolved crime, or it was a satanic ritual assault, or some kid crazed on drugs. What it really is the continuation of satanic blood sacrifices of human beings that was done under the worship of Dagon, which was done under the worship of other false gods like Molech or Ashtaroth, or all of these ancient pagan gods are really Satan in disguise, requiring human blood sacrifice because that's where they draw their power metaphysically from. And Halloween is the most important of all those days in terms of giving Satan his worship, giving him his power, and giving Satan his required human blood sacrifices throughout the world, including the United States of America. Somewhere on Halloween, some poor kid is going to be sacrificed to Satan in some wood in either upstate New York or in Cortlandt Park in New York City or in any of these other places that we've heard, oh, what a terrible anomaly. They were killing kids in the woods and they cut his heart out and they're like, oh, the guy must have been on PCP or something. They were devil worshippers. And Halloween is the outward expression of a practice that the pagans have practiced as far back as Nimrod. And it's a curse upon the land which won't be healed until Jesus comes back a second time. But in the meantime, should we participate in glorifying and honoring that? Because if we do, Steve, we are what?
Partaking in the devil's table.
We're fellowshipping in killing kids to honor and glorify Satan. And that's what I think Halloween really, at the end of the day, as much as I enjoyed it, I loved it. It was fun. It was my second favorite holiday. Christmas was my favorite. And, Halloween was my second favorite because it was scary and mysterious. And we go to cemeteries, we get candy. But it was satanic at the end of the day. And now I know better, so I don't do it anymore. And Paul says, don't participate in the unfruitful works of darkness. Don't be participating. Expose it. He's saying, go on the internet and do teaching. That's why I do this every year. Because Paul says we have to. We have to expose it. There's somebody listening right now. Mama Kelly never heard this. Ben's heard this before. Some of you guys have heard this before. Some people tonight on the internet are hearing this for the very first time. And I think, like, what on earth? I had no idea. I didn't know. But now we know. And so we've exposed darkness and we've done that. And in 2 days, when Halloween comes around, we know that we're praying against a power and a force that will result in the loss of innocent lives. But we're not participating in it, and we're not encouraging it, and we're not joining in fellowship with it. We are opposed to it, and we're exposing it, and we're going to get a reward in heaven for it. So, hey, we're going to miss out in trick-or-treating, and, Phil, you're going to have to take your costume back to the shop now. Can't go to Coconut Grove on Saturday. Sorry. But so what? And of course I'm joking with Phil. But we are, the Bible says, strangers. I love that. In Hebrews chapter 10, is it? Strangers and pilgrims in the earth. It's like we've been dropped behind enemy lines and told to occupy till I come, hold station, do not retreat, and you will fight, soldier, and that means you. You will continue to fight until we send the air back, choppers in, to evacuate you out through the air. And that's coming in the form of the rapture. But until then, we got to stand our ground and fight. And part of the battle is to expose the unfruitful works of darkness. And so that people who are out there that don't know any better can know better. Oh my gosh, am I fellowshipping with Satan and killing children by trick-or-treating, go to Coconut Grove and putting on a costume and putting devil horns on? Am I lending my power and my spiritual oneness to a demonic entity? Am I drawing an unseen spirit being who's wandering the earth, looking for somewhere, like Jesus said, looking for a place to inhabit? Am I inviting them to come inhabit my body? And now I've got strange cravings and desires to do things that I can't seem to control. How did that happen? Did that happen when I was participating in unfruitful works of darkness by engaging in a satanic ceremony known as Halloween? I've read books about people that say that that's how demonic possession happened to them. And so that's what we're attempting to do, expose the unfruitful works of darkness. And so with that, that's my rant on Halloween this year. Hopefully we won't have to do this next year because we'll be in the Father's house at the marriage feast of the Lamb, watching things swing out of control here on the earth. Hopefully this time next year we'll be in heaven. And so with that, Steve, pray us out, and hopefully this will be the last time you'll lead the prayer for this particular Halloween annual special teaching.
Lord God, creator of the universe, Lord God, author of our salvation. Lord, you've given us the tools to be able to go out and do battle against the unfruitful works of darkness. Lord, I pray that all of us here in the audience and also those out there watching, Lord, that they leave with encouragement and understanding that they have truth on their side, and that you've given us that as a mandate to go on and expose those unfruitful works of darkness. Lord, we thank you again for this fellowship. We thank you for those who are able to make it today. Ben will be traveling here in the next few days, Lord, back to Brazil, and that Lord, that we understand and truly value what you sent your Son Jesus Christ to do for us, Lord. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, with that,
So,
thank you guys. That was very helpful.
yeah.